My mom stole my college fund, then had the nerve to beg me for money. She gave it all to my cousin, told me to figure it out, and then cut me off for 5 years. Now that she's broke, suddenly I'm family again? Yeah, no. She made her choice, now she can live with it. I still remember the exact moment my life flipped upside down. It was a regular evening, nothing out of the ordinary, until the phone rang. The voice on the other end wasn't from the hospital, a police officer, or even a close friend of my dad's. It was a woman I had never heard of before. She was crying, nearly hysterical, struggling to get the words out. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I called the ambulance, but it was too late. He's gone." First, I thought she had the wrong number. But then she said my dad's name. And that's when my mom and I realized the nightmare was real. My dad had died suddenly from cardiac arrest. He had been out of town for one of his so-called work trips when it happened. But this woman, a complete stranger to us, was the one who found him, the one who called for help, the one who had been with him in his final moments. Not a coworker, not a friend, his girlfriend. My mom went completely pale. Neither of us could believe what we were hearing. My father had been cheating, and for who knows how long. Without another word, we rushed to the hospital. The entire car ride there was filled with silence, heavy and suffocating. My mom's hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that her knuckles turned white. By the time we arrived, the doctors confirmed what the woman on the phone had already told us. My father was gone. And then standing in the waiting room was her. The girlfriend. A woman we had never seen before, crying like she had lost a husband, while we stood there, still reeling from the betrayal. I felt numb. My mom, on the other hand, she was furious. As soon as the shock wore off, she stormed up to the woman, demanding answers. And that's when the ugly truth came out. My father had been having an affair for 2 years. 2 years of lies, deception, and betrayal. 2 years of telling us he was on business trips while he was actually sneaking away with her. 2 years of pretending to be a loving husband and father, while secretly building a second life behind our backs. My mom let the woman have it, calling her every name under the sun. The woman just stood there sobbing, apologizing over and over, saying she never meant to hurt anyone. But it didn't matter, because the person my mom was really furious with was dead. He wasn't there to answer for his mistakes. He had left us to deal with the wreckage. The funeral was a complete blur. People came, offering condolences, sharing stories about what a great man my dad was. I didn't know how to feel. One minute I wanted to cry. The next I wanted to scream. How do you mourn someone when you're juggling both grief and rage at the same time? For my mom, the anger won out. She barely spoke to anyone that day. Just stood there, stiff and hollow-eyed, staring at his casket like she didn't recognize the man inside. And maybe in a way she didn't. After that, she was never the same. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost the illusion of the life she thought she had. And that realization shattered her. After the funeral, my mom wasn't the same person anymore. She wasn't just grieving. She was consumed by rage. It wasn't enough that my dad had died suddenly. No, he had to die while living a double life, leaving behind a mess we never saw coming. First, she just shut down. Barely spoke, barely ate, just sat in the living room staring at nothing for hours. But then her grief morphed into something else entirely, an obsession. She needed to know everything. She tore through his phone, his emails, his old text messages, searching for proof of just how deep the betrayal went. I'd walk into the room and find her hunched over his laptop, scrolling through messages, her face twisted with hurt and disgust. "Look at this," she'd snap, shoving the screen toward me. Look what he was saying to her while we were at home thinking he was working. I didn't know what she wanted me to say. Yeah, Dad cheated. Yeah, he was a liar. But what was the point of digging through the ashes when nothing could change what happened? She even started grilling me, as if I had some secret insight into my father's life. "Did you ever notice anything? Did he ever act weird around you?" No, never. To me, Dad was just Dad. The guy who never missed my basketball games. The guy who took me for ice cream every Saturday. The guy who sat in the front row at my school plays, cheering louder than anyone else. How was I supposed to reconcile those memories with the man who had lied to us for years? But my mom didn't care about my inner struggle. She needed a villain, and since my father was gone, Her hatred had nowhere to go. So she directed it at the only thing left, finding out every single detail of his affair. That's when Uncle Daniel started coming around more often. Daniel was my dad's younger brother. A quiet guy, never the center of attention but always solid. He had a daughter, Samantha, who was my age, and we had basically grown up together. Her mom had died when she was a baby, so Uncle Daniel had raised her alone. I always respected him for that. He was the dependable one in the family. At first, I didn't think much about his visits. He was just checking in on us, bringing dinner sometimes, talking to my mom when she needed it. Seemed normal enough. But then things started getting weird. They spent more and more time alone, sitting out on the porch talking for hours. I'd walk past the kitchen and hear them whispering, my mom asking him things about my dad, if he had ever suspected the affair, if he had ever noticed anything. Uncle Daniel would just shake his head and sigh. "I don't know, Lisa," he'd say. I never saw it coming either. At first, I thought it was just two grieving people leaning on each other. My mom had lost her husband, and Daniel had lost his brother. Of course, they want to talk things through. But the way they were acting, it didn't feel right. Then one evening, I came home early from school. I had skipped basketball practice because I wasn't feeling great. The house was quiet when I walked in, too quiet. I started toward the kitchen when I heard low voices coming from the living room. And that's when I saw them. My mom and Uncle Daniel. On the couch. Kissing. Not a quick friendly peck. A full-on deeply intimate kiss. I froze. My stomach turned. My brain refused to process what I was looking at. My mom. And my uncle. I backed away before they could notice me, slipped out the front door and ran. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, gasping for breath, my hands shaking. What the hell had I just seen? Was this some kind of grief-induced breakdown? Or had this been brewing all along, right under my nose? I stayed out for hours, walking around aimlessly, trying to erase the image from my mind. But it was burned in there permanently. By the time I got home, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything. What was I even supposed to say? "Hey, Mom. Why are you making out with Dad's brother in our living room?" No, I couldn't deal with that conversation. So I said nothing. And she never brought it up either. But from that moment on, everything started changing. Daniel visited more and more often. His excuse was always the same: Samantha wanted to hang out with me. And sure, we did, but we both knew that wasn't the real reason he was here. I watched as my mom and uncle grew closer. The little stolen glances, the hushed conversations, the lingering touches. It was impossible not to notice. The worst part? Daniel looked just like my dad. He wasn't just his brother. He could have been his younger twin. The same face, the same voice, the same stupid chuckle. Sometimes when I heard his voice from another room, I would forget for just a second. I'd think my dad was still here. And then I'd remember. And it would all come crashing down again. I told myself it was temporary, that my mom was just grieving in the worst way possible, and eventually she'd come to her senses. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't a phase. This was just the beginning. I had spent my whole life hearing about my college fund. My dad had always made it clear that he and my mom had been saving for it ever since I was born. It wasn't just some passing comment either. He mentioned it all the time. Every time I got a good grade, every time I worked hard at something, he'd smile and say, "That's my kid. You're gonna do great things in college." So, by the time I was a senior in high school, I was confident. I had worked my ass off, gotten into a good school, and was ready to start this new chapter of my life. I didn't have to worry about tuition. I had my fund, or at least I thought I did. One evening, I sat my mom down at the kitchen table. "I need to start handling my tuition stuff," I told her. "Can you help me access the college fund?" She blinked, paused. Then for the first time she looked nervous. "Why do you need the money so soon?" she asked, shifting in her chair. I frowned. "Because I have to pay for college?" She let out this awkward little laugh, like I had just said something ridiculous. "I just meant, don't you have financial aid or scholarships you could apply for?" That's when I felt it. That gut-deep sinking feeling that something was wrong. I sat back in my chair, eyes narrowing. "Mom, what's going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sighed and rubbed her temples like I was giving her a headache. And then she said it. "I gave the money to Samantha." For a few seconds, I didn't understand what she meant. What? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She exhaled like this was something I should have seen coming. Samantha needed it more than you. The words hit like a slap. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was kidding. But she wasn't. I shook my head, my chest tightening. Mom, you're joking, right? That money was for me. She crossed her arms and sat up straighter, like she was bracing for a fight. Your Uncle Daniel has struggled to raise Samantha alone. He doesn't have the same financial security we do. I repeated, my voice rising. We don't have financial security, Mom. You just gave away my college fund. She didn't even flinch. Don't be dramatic, she said. You'll be fine. You can take out loans, get a job, you're smart, you'll figure it out. I could feel the rage boiling under my skin. This isn't about being smart, Mom. This is about you stealing my future and handing it over to someone else. Her expression hardened. She deserved it more than you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Samantha, my cousin, had taken my college money, and the worst part? My mom had decided that was okay. I clenched my fists, my breath coming fast. Dad worked his ass off to save that money for me, not for Uncle Daniel's kid. And that's when she snapped. She pushed back from the table and slammed her hands down. Your father was a lying, cheating bastard, and I don't owe him anything. You shouldn't worship the ground he walked on. It wasn't the first time she had gone on this rant. Since my dad's death, she had been rewriting history, acting like everything he had ever done was worthless because of the affair. But this time it was different. She wasn't just trashing my dad's memory. She was using it as an excuse to screw me over. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So what? This is my punishment for still loving my dad even though he cheated on you. She crossed her arms and glared at me. You need to grow up. The world doesn't revolve around you. I felt something inside me break. I had spent my whole life thinking my mom was a good person. But in that moment I realized the truth. She didn't care about me. Not really. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. All right, I said. If that's how you feel, then fine. But let me make something clear. Dad's portion of that money was mine. You can do whatever you want with your half, but if you don't give me what Dad saved for me, I swear to God, I'll sue you. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't. I leaned forward, my voice low and dead serious. Try me. She looked at me like I was a complete stranger, like I was someone she had never really known. For the first time, she saw me as a threat. And after a long, tense silence, she finally exhaled sharply. Fine, she spat. Take the damn money. But don't expect anything else from me. I stood up, feeling completely numb. Don't worry, I said. I won't. A few months later, I packed up my things and left. I took whatever was left of my dad's savings, applied for student loans, and picked up every part-time job I could find. It wasn't easy. I worked insane hours, barely slept, and lived off ramen and coffee. But I got through it. Meanwhile, my mom? She never once checked in on me. No birthday calls. No Merry Christmas texts. Nothing. It was like I had ceased to exist. But I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally free. Leaving home should have felt like a fresh start. A chance to finally build something for myself. But the truth? It felt like being thrown into a storm with no life raft. I had always imagined college as this exciting new chapter. Meeting new people. Chasing big dreams. Finally stepping into adulthood. Instead, I was barely staying afloat. Money was tight. Sure, I had managed to scrape together what was left of my dad's savings. But it was nowhere near enough to cover tuition, rent, and food. So I did what I had to do. I worked my ass off. I picked up multiple part-time jobs. Barista in the mornings, waiter at night, campus library shifts in between. Some days I ran from one job to another, barely squeezing in enough time for classes. I learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, downing cheap coffee like it was water. I couldn't afford anything extra. No nights out, no new clothes, no stupid little things other college kids took for granted. And honestly, I resented that. I resented that while I was scraping by, Samantha was living comfortably on my stolen future. Every now and then, I'd see her posting pictures online, laughing with friends, traveling, having the college experience I was supposed to have. And it burned. That should have been me. But the difference between us? I earned my place here. And no matter how hard things got, I wasn't going to quit. For the first year, I still held on to this stupid, tiny hope that maybe my mom would reach out. Maybe she'd text me on my birthday. Maybe she'd call on Christmas. Maybe she'd realize what she had done. But she never did. Nothing. Not even a single half-assed "How are you?" message. And eventually I stopped waiting for one. I stopped checking my phone, hoping for her name to pop up. Stopped expecting anything at all. If she wanted to pretend like I didn't exist, fine. I'd do the same. Despite everything, I kept pushing forward. I studied when I could. Took every shift I was offered. Made connections, built skills, did everything in my power to create a future for myself, without anyone's help. And slowly things started getting better. I climbed the ranks at my jobs, earning better pay. My grades stayed solid. Professors started noticing me, recommending me for internships. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting to succeed. And that's when I realized something. Maybe my mom had given up on me. But I never gave up on myself. By the time I graduated, I had a full-time job lined up, paying me more money than I had ever seen in my life. For the first time, I could actually breathe. I got my own place. No roommates, no borrowed spaces. Just mine. I furnished it with my own money, paid my own bills, built my own life. And when I looked at everything I had accomplished, I knew. I didn't owe my mother a damn thing. She had left me to figure it all out on my own. So now that I had, she wasn't a part of the picture anymore. I was done waiting for her to be the mother I needed. I had survived alone, and I was never going back. It had been 5 years since I last spoke to my mom. 5 years of silence, of birthdays passing without a text, of holidays spent without a single call from her. And honestly, I was fine with it. I had built my life from the ground up. I had a great job, my own place, and finally, after years of struggling, I felt stable. I felt free. Then one day, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I almost didn't recognize. Mom. She didn't start with a greeting or ask how I was doing. She went straight to the point. Call me back. It's important. I stared at the message, debating whether to ignore it. Against my better judgment, I called. She picked up on the first ring. You finally decided to call your own mother back, she said, voice dripping with bitterness. No hello. No how have you been? Just instant guilt tripping. I sighed. What do you want? She didn't even hesitate. I need you to send me money. I almost laughed out loud. 5 years of no contact, and now suddenly she needed me? Excuse me. She launched into a story about how she had been in a car accident, how she fractured her leg and couldn't work, how the medical bills were piling up, and she needed help to pay them off. That's tough, I said flatly. You don't even care, do you? She snapped. Kind of hard to care about someone who hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. That's when the rant started. She went on about how I had abandoned her, how I had been ungrateful after everything she did for me. She even brought up the college fund, twisting it as if I had taken money from her instead of the other way around. You know, if you weren't so selfish, you'd help your own mother instead of leaving me to struggle alone, she said, her voice thick with self-pity. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And this is how you repay me. I took a deep breath, gripping my phone tighter. You didn't raise me. You gave up on me the moment you decided Samantha's future mattered more than mine. That's not fair, she hissed. No? What's not fair is that I had to work myself to exhaustion just to get through college because my own mother decided I wasn't her priority. She let out a bitter laugh. Well, aren't you doing great now? You have a good job, right? Samantha told me all about it. You're making good money. What's the point of all that success if you can't even help your own mother? I scoffed. Unbelievable. Let me ask you something. Where was this family loyalty when I was struggling? When I was working multiple jobs just to afford food? You didn't care then, but now that you need money, suddenly I'm supposed to be the good son. She went silent for a moment, then tried another tactic. I have no one else, you know. I can't ask Daniel. He's already helping as much as he can. And Samantha has her own life to deal with. I cut her off. Oh, so they can't help you, but somehow I have to? You're my son, she snapped. And you were my mother. But you didn't act like one when it mattered. So now, you don't get to demand anything from me. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. So that's it? You're just going to let me suffer? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I said coldly. Figure it out. Just like I had to. I hung up before she could respond. The text started rolling in immediately after. First, it was guilt. Telling me how heartless I was, how Dad would be ashamed of me, how she couldn't believe I had turned out this way. Then came the begging, pleading for just a little help just this one time. Then the anger, calling me a selfish, ungrateful brat who was no better than my cheating father. I ignored every single one. Then, a few days later, I got a message from an unexpected number, Daniel. I didn't even realize he still had my number. I know things between you and your mom have been rough, but she really needs you right now. Family is family. We have to take care of each other. I rolled my eyes. Of course. The same guy who never once checked on me when I was struggling, who took everything my mom had to give, was now telling me about family loyalty. I replied with one message. She took care of you and Samantha. Now it's your turn. Don't ever contact me again. Blocked. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. It had been over a week since I shut my mother down. The texts had slowed down, but every now and then, she would send a passive-aggressive voicemail or a long-winded message about how I was abandoning my only family. I ignored every single one. Then one day I got a notification. My cousin Samantha had posted something on Facebook. It was one of those long dramatic posts, talking about how sad it is when people forget where they came from, and how money changes people, turning them cold toward their own family. I knew exactly who it was about, and I was done. For years I had stayed quiet. Let my mom spin whatever narrative she wanted about me. Let my uncle and cousin enjoy the life they built off of what was supposed to be mine. But this was the last straw. I opened Facebook and started typing. I laid out everything. How my mom had stolen my college fund and given it to Samantha, leaving me to work multiple jobs just to survive. How she had never once reached out to help me, but the moment she needed money, suddenly I was her son again. How Daniel and Samantha had benefited from my mother's generosity for years, but when it was their turn to step up, they suddenly had nothing to offer. I even spelled out how my mother had cut me off first, yet now she was trying to guilt-trip me for doing the same thing. I hit post and put my phone down. It didn't take long for the chaos to start. Within an hour, my messages were blowing up. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were commenting, messaging, asking me if it was true. Some were horrified. Others were shocked, saying they had no idea. Then, of course, there was Samantha and Daniel. Are you serious? Why would you air our family business like this? Wow. I can't believe you're acting like a victim when you turned your back on your own mother. You're making Mom sound like a monster. She just wanted what was best for everyone. I ignored them, because for once, I was controlling the narrative. And then my mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail though. A long screaming voicemail, filled with anger and desperation. She accused me of ruining her reputation, of betraying the family, of being ungrateful after everything she had done for me. She demanded I take the post down. I didn't. Then the messages changed. She begged, said she had made mistakes but that she was still my mother. That family is forever. I blocked her. I blocked all of them. I took the post down a few days later, not because I regretted it, but because I had said everything that needed to be said. They wanted to paint me as the villain? Fine. But now, everyone knew the truth, and I could finally move on. It had been weeks since I cut off my mom for good. No texts, no calls, no Facebook drama. I finally had peace. Or at least I thought I did. One night I got home late from work. The sun had already set, and as I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. The hairs on my neck stood up before I even realized why. Someone was sitting on my front steps. First, I didn't recognize her. It had been years since I'd seen her in person, and in the dim porch light, she looked smaller than I remembered. Then she opened her mouth. "You blocked me," she said. Her voice was sharp, accusing. I sighed. "Yeah, I did." She crossed her arms. "That's not how you treat your own mother." I let out a humorless laugh. "Is that so? Because I seem to remember you having no problem cutting me off for 5 years." She waved a hand, brushing off my words like they didn't matter. "You were being dramatic." "I did what I had to do." I leaned against my car, arms crossed. And now I'm doing what I have to do. So why are you here? That's when she pulled out a stack of hospital bills and shoved them toward me. I need help. I can't pay these on my own. I stared at them but didn't take them. Not my problem, I said simply. Her face twisted. I raised you. I clenched my jaw. No, you didn't. You gave up on me. You chose Uncle Daniel and Samantha over me. Now you can go ask them for help. Her mouth opened then closed. For the first time she looked uncertain. They're struggling too, she admitted. I almost laughed in her face. Oh, so the people you sacrificed everything for won't help you, and now you come crawling to me? That's rich. Her expression darkened. You're just like your father. Cold. Selfish. I tilted my head. Funny. You had no problem taking his money when it suited you. She scowled, gripping the hospital bills tighter. You have a good job now. What's the point of all that money if you can't even help your own mother? I exhaled slowly. Let me make something clear. The moment you gave away my college fund, the moment you told me I didn't matter as much as Samantha, that's when you stopped being my mother. I owe you nothing. Her lips trembled. For a split second, I saw something almost human in her expression, regret, maybe, but she covered it up with bitterness just as quickly. So that's it, she whispered. That's it, I confirmed. Her eyes flickered toward my front door, like she was considering pushing past me, but I straightened, squaring my shoulders. Leave, I said. Or I call the cops. She scoffed but took a step back. You really would, wouldn't you? Try me. She hesitated, then grabbed her purse, clutching the bills to her chest. She turned and walked off, disappearing into the night. I waited until she was out of sight before I finally exhaled. Then I went inside and locked the door. That was the last time I ever saw her. And honestly, I don't regret a damn thing.